Hey everyone, welcome to The New Populist. I'm Dave Brown, co-author of the book Black and White: How the Left is Destroying the Dream of Martin Luther King and Our Founding Fathers. As you're well aware, we live in a clown world, and my effort to fight back against this clown world was to write this book on race relations from a non-Black Lives Matter perspective, a right-leaning, hopefully more balanced perspective. So if you're interested, pick up a copy. It's available on Amazon, and there is a link in the description. And of course, if you're new to the channel, please share, like, and subscribe. The topic today is COVID-19, the Great Reset, the environment. And this is perfect timing because we just had the Hurricane Ida. And I don't mean to trivialize it. I know that if you're in the Northeast, there's been a lot of flooding, loss of life. So I don't want to make light of it. But as far as the subject matter, the environment as relates to COVID-19 and the Great Reset, it's perfect timing because our president, Joe Biden, has said a few things that I'll talk about later that's relevant to this subject matter. And of course, my source for my discussions is always their information. Oftentimes we talk about a certain subject matter and we guess about what it is, or we have our own opinions. And my thing is, they will tell you what they think. All you need to do is find their information, read their books when they write them, and they will tell you what they're trying to do. And so my source is COVID-19, The Great Reset, written by Klaus Shwab, who is the founder and chairman of the World Economic Forum, and he's a bigwig as far as the global elite are concerned. So I read his book, and I go through here, I find the meatiest parts that I think are relevant to us as conservatives or people on the right that we need to focus in on and pay attention to so we can know what we're fighting back against. So let's get right into it. In this first excerpt, he's talking about COVID-19, the pandemic, and the environment, and how they seem distantly related, but they have a lot more in common than we think. So here he says, at first glance, the pandemic and environment may seem to be only distantly related cousins, but they are much closer and more intertwined than we think. Both have and will continue to interact in unpredictable and distinctive ways, ranging from the part played by diminished biodiversity in the behavior of infectious diseases to the effect that COVID-19 might have on climate change, thus illustrating the perilously subtle balance and complex interactions between humankind and nature. Now, he goes on to list 5 different attributes for the pandemic and the environment. The first is that they are known. The second is that they are non-linear, meaning, the effects don't happen in a smooth fashion. They're often happen in disruptive, jumps. And we've seen with the pandemic, we'll have periods where it's okay, and then we'll have a spike and it'll come back down. So it's a non-linear, effect on the planet. The third thing, the probabilities and distributions of their impacts are very hard, if not impossible to measure. And that's a useful thing in the sense that they can, exaggerate in any direction the impact of something based on what their agenda is. So that's important for that reason. The fourth thing is that they are global in nature, meaning that if they're global in nature, they need a global response, a coordinated global response. And again, that goes back to the idea of a supranational world government, or at very least some sort of coordination. And the fifth one is the effect disproportionately the most vulnerable countries. This is a theme. Everything on the left, they always use poor people as a reason to implement their solutions. So if you go against them, what do they say? You don't care about poor people. You're self-centered, and everything they're doing has a benevolent cause, and you just need to get on board with it. Now, this next section is something we really need to pay attention to because this is where they take the pandemic and the environment and look at their differences, and they bridge that gap to say, what have we been able to do with this pandemic that we haven't been able to do with the environment? And this has to do with how the two affect us in the short term. And with this pandemic, the effects are pretty obvious, or at least what they say they are, and people are more open to certain measures, whereas the environmental stuff, it's more long term, and it's harder to get people to understand the impacts that we're suffering, and thus they are more unwilling to accept some of the more draconian measures. So this is the part that we really need to focus in on. So listen to this excerpt right here. An outbreak threatens our survival as individuals or a species, and we therefore respond immediately with determination when faced with the risk. By contrast, climate change and nature loss are gradual and cumulative, with the effects that are discernible mostly in the medium and long term. And despite more and more climate-related and exceptional nature loss events, there are still significant numbers who remain unconvinced of the immediacy of the climate crisis. This crucial difference between the respective time horizons of a pandemic and that of climate change and nature loss means that a pandemic risk requires immediate action that will be followed by a rapid result, while climate change and nature loss also require immediate action, but the result, or future reward, in the jargon of economists, will only follow with a certain lag. And that is problematic for our planners. If they can't convince you that there is a problem that is immediate and threatening your safety, they may not be able to get you to accept their new laws and regulations. And so we're going to see in the future, and actually we're going to see right now, how they're trying to convince you that any sort of weather event that's severe or causes loss of life is somehow connected to global warming or climate change. He goes on to say, often, scientists cannot point to a direct link of causation between climate change and a specific weather event like a drought or the severity of a hurricane. While for a pandemic, a majority of citizens will tend to agree with the necessity to impose coercive measures, they will resist constraining policies in the case of environmental risks, where the evidence can be disputed. Well, I think we've already seen some of that. What did they call you if you challenge climate change? You're a climate change denier. And what do they say about the science? The science is settled. So if you challenge it and you are a scientist, you can say goodbye to your government grants and support from academia, and you're going to be blackballed. So they're trying to push everybody into this one stream of thought so that this issue here of disputing climate change is gone. Because once that's gone, they go to the next step, then convincing you that anything that happens, any storm, any loss of life, is related to climate change. And we've seen with this pandemic, if they can scare you enough, they can take your freedoms and your liberties. And that's the next thing they're going to do with climate change. And again, they've already been doing this. They've been talking about super hurricanes now for 20 years or 15 years with Hurricane Katrina and New Orleans, Superstorm Sandy. And they said that was caused by global warming and climate change. So it's already happening. And they're going to try to scare you with this because that's the avenue to take away your rights and your freedoms. And, Biden said recently, he said on Ida, he goes, extreme storms and the climate crisis are here. So more of this tying together weather events to climate change in order to scare you and to blame us, the people, for the cause of this bad weather. And they can save us if we give up our rights and our freedoms. He goes on, even unprecedented and draconian lockdowns with a third of the world population confined to their homes for more than a month came nowhere near to being a viable decarbonization strategy because, even so, the world economy kept emitting large amounts of carbon dioxide. So what does this require? He says two things. a radical and major systemic change in how we produce the energy we need to function. And second, we need structural changes in our consumption behavior. If in the post-pandemic era we decide to resume our lives just as before, the COVID-19 crisis will have gone to waste as far as climate policies are concerned. Where have we seen that before? This talk about, crisis going to waste. And again, this is what this whole thing's about. They take a crisis and use that chaos to ram home the things that they want to enact. Again, we saw this after World War I, World War II, and this one they're calling, the Great Reset. And it's not a reset, it's just taking advantage of crisis to enact their policies. And this next part here is the part that I laugh at, because we can look in hindsight and look at some evidence to show how stupid this is and how hypocritical they are. He talks about enlightened leadership. He says here, some leaders and decision makers who are already at the forefront of the fight against climate change may want to take advantage of the shock inflicted by the pandemic to implement long-lasting and wider environmental changes. They will, in effect, make good use of the pandemic by not letting the crisis go to waste. The exhortation of the different leaders ranging from the Prince of Wales, I guess His Royal Highness, to Andrew Cuomo to Build Back Better go in that direction. So he says explicitly, don't let this crisis go to waste. He's echoing Rahm Emanuel, and he points to enlightened leadership. Andrew Cuomo. How many people did Andrew Cuomo kill in those nursing homes in New York? Too many to count. Where's he at now? He resigned in disgrace. And just to really, show you the hypocrisy, this is a story here about Andrew Cuomo. Taxpayers spent nearly $650,000 on Governor Cuomo's King 1 state-owned plane. He had 460 times flown in this plane in 5 years, costing the taxpayers $650,000. 460 private plane flights by Andrew Cuomo, the enlightened leader against climate change. And of course, on this plane, he was also being a pervert and trying to get his female aides to strip down, but we'll ignore that for now. And Prince Charles took 3 private jet flights in 11 days, then met Greta Thunberg. So these elites, they talk about these issues, but they don't actually live what they teach. I've often said, my friends and, talking about, hippies, people on the far left who are, riding their bikes to work. I might disagree with what they think as far as, the environment or how we should, fight it, any issues with the environment. But I respect the fact that they at least talk the talk and they walk the walk. So if I see that guy on his bicycle going to work, is it my choice? I wouldn't do that. But I go, you know what? At least he's actually living what he talks about. But these elites, they're so hypocritical and they're so condescending. And when people, look up to them as being somebody that are, heroes in this fight against, say, climate change here, I go, hey, man, don't you realize that they never suffer the consequences of any of the policies that they enact? We're cockroaches. We're both cockroaches here. And I understand that that boot coming down top of my head, I recognize that. But you're over there cheering for the boot. That's what I don't get. So when these people on the left, they support these policies that hurt their livelihood, but not the livelihood of the people in charge, it blows my mind. And we've seen with Schwarzenegger too, another one of those guys, big climate change guy. He lived in LA, but of course the capital of California, Sacramento, is in Northern California, and every day he flew his private plane back and forth to work. And he's a big climate change fighter. So they're hypocrites. And the other thing they try to do too is the carbon credits. All this basically is a way for people who are rich to buy their way into not having to change their lifestyles because they can afford to. The rest of us, 99%, well, we're taking the Greyhound bus because, we can't afford to fly anymore. So the policies of the elites never actually affect their daily life. And this issue of climate change is spilling into other areas as well. Just a few days ago, the HHS, Department of Health and Human Services, they established a Office of Climate Change and Health Equity. So the craziness continues. Now, climate change is now a health issue. And of course, when you read their comment on this matter, and this comes from our Assistant Secretary for Health, Dr. Rachel Levin. She says that we will use the lessons learned from COVID-19 to address these disparities, prioritizing and protecting the nation's health. Climate change is turbocharging the horrific wildfires, extreme heat, and devastating floods that are killing people and making millions more sick from exposure to unhealthy mold, and debilitating heat. The new HHS Office of Climate Change and Health Equity is fulfilling President Biden's vision to bring America's world-class medical community into the fight against climate change, a fight for our health that ensures no community is left behind. So, two issues. Once again, they want to convince you that their actions are benevolent. So if you fight back against them, it's because you're selfish and you don't care about poor people. And second, climate change is turbocharging the horrific wildfires, killing people and making millions more sick. So they're taking this long-term issue of climate change and they're trying really hard to make it a short-term issue like the COVID-19 pandemic, because as they've learned, or better said, as they've always known, if they can convince you that your safety of yourself and your family is an imminent threat due to an issue, they can convince you to give up your freedoms and liberties so they can enact their radical agenda. They tell us what they're going to do. They write books telling us what they're going to do. All we have to do is pay attention. That's it for now. Once again, if you're new to this channel, please share, like, and subscribe. I'll see you next time.